What if United 93 had failed on 9/11? Would America have collapsed? September 11th, 2001. The sky over New York was bluer than ever. Morning sunlight spilled across Fifth Avenue, glinting off the windows of towering skyscrapers and bouncing off the bright yellow taxis that wove through the streets. Americans were beginning an ordinary day. Office workers rushed to their jobs, parents dropped off their kids at school, and couples strolled hand in hand through Central Park. No one knew that in just a few minutes, the world would stop breathing. 8:46 a.m. A thunderous explosion shattered the calm. American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Shock rippled through New York. 17 minutes later, another plane. Then the Pentagon. News feeds flooded in. Millions of eyes locked onto TV screens, paralyzed by fear. And then, one more plane was still in the sky. United 93. On board, the passengers slowly began to understand. This wasn't a hijacking for ransom. They weren't just victims. They were weapons. Flying toward an unknown target, on a one-way path to horror. They faced a choice no one should ever have to make. To die. So others might live. They fought back. They stormed the cockpit. And the plane crashed into an open field in Pennsylvania, instead of slamming into the White House or the Capitol. But what if they hadn't? What if they hadn't acted? What if United 93 had struck the heart of American democracy? It all began in silence. No alarms, no warnings. Just ordinary men and women boarding planes, sipping coffee, scrolling through newspapers, settling into their seats for cross-country flights. But within minutes of takeoff, something unthinkable began to unfold. 4 commercial flights, 19 hijackers, 1 coordinated nightmare. American Airlines Flight 11 took off from Boston at 7:59 a.m., bound for Los Angeles. But it never got there. Instead, it was overtaken by 5 hijackers and rerouted toward New York. At 8:46 a.m., it crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, tearing through steel and concrete, igniting a fireball that would be etched into the minds of an entire generation. United Airlines Flight 175 followed just behind. Also from Boston, also hijacked. At 9:03 a.m., it slammed into the South Tower. By then, the world knew. This was no accident. America was under attack. 34 minutes later, at 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, the heart of the nation's military command. The scope of the attack was now undeniable. New York was burning. Washington was bleeding. And yet, another plane remained, United 93. It had taken off late, at 8:42 a.m. from Newark, New Jersey, heading for San Francisco. Unlike the others, United 93 was delayed on the tarmac. That delay changed everything. By the time hijackers took control of the plane at 9:28 a.m., passengers had already learned, via phone calls, what was happening across the country. They knew this wasn't a routine hijacking. They knew the towers had fallen. They knew they were next. United 93 was flying toward Washington, D.C. The assumed target? The White House, or perhaps the Capitol, the symbols of American freedom, power, and democracy. But inside that plane, ordinary people made an extraordinary choice. They wouldn't let it happen. They wouldn't be used. They wouldn't go quietly. The morning of September 11th didn't just bring devastation. It brought a level of horror that unfolded with mathematical precision. 4 planes, 4 suicide missions, 4 deadly trajectories aimed at America's beating heart. The first 2, Flight 11 and Flight 175, hit the World Trade Center towers within 17 minutes of each other. Flames engulfed the buildings. Clouds of black smoke billowed over Manhattan. People leapt from windows in desperation. By 10:30 a.m., both towers had collapsed. 2,000 lives gone in under 2 hours. Then came Flight 77, crashing into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. The world's most secure military headquarters was now a firestorm of twisted steel and burning fuel. Emergency responders rushed to contain the chaos, not knowing that another threat was still in the air. United Airlines Flight 93. It had lifted off from Newark International Airport at 8:42 a.m., running 42 minutes behind schedule. Bound for San Francisco, it carried 33 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 hijackers. That delay may have seemed trivial at first, a mild inconvenience. But in hindsight, it may have saved the nation. By the time United 93 was hijacked at 9:28 a.m., 30,000 feet above eastern Ohio, the other planes had already struck their targets. But the passengers on board didn't yet know that. Not until they began making phone calls. One by one, they reached loved ones, airline employees, 911 dispatchers. And the stories coming back were chilling. The Twin Towers were gone. The Pentagon was hit. America was under siege. This was no routine hijacking. This was a weapon in motion. The hijackers had locked the cockpit and redirected the flight southeast, toward Washington, D.C. Intelligence and flight path analyses later concluded that the most likely targets were either the White House, the ultimate symbol of executive power, or the U.S. Capitol building, the heart of American democracy. And on that plane, something remarkable happened. Ordinary Americans, business people, mothers, fathers, flight attendants, realized they were the last line of defense. With nothing but hot water, food carts, and their bare hands, they voted to fight back. There are no videos, no live recordings, only fragments of phone calls, desperate goodbyes, and snippets from the cockpit voice recorder recovered from the crash site. But those fragments tell a story of extraordinary courage. One passenger, Todd Beamer, was heard saying the now iconic words, "Let's roll." The passengers rushed the cockpit. Chaos erupted. The plane rocked violently. The hijackers tried to knock them off balance. At 10:03 a.m., United 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at over 500 miles per hour, killing everyone on board instantly. But they had succeeded. They had stopped the fourth plane. They had saved the Capitol. Maybe even the president. Maybe thousands of lives. In the darkest of hours, amid the flames, fear, and confusion, they gave us hope. United 93 became more than a flight number. It became a symbol of resistance, of ordinary people becoming heroes in the span of 20 minutes. A moment where courage triumphed over terror and turned a target into a crater in an empty field. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't carry weapons. They weren't trained to fight. But they stood up anyway. And because they did, the story of 9/11, devastating as it was, didn't end with the Capitol in ruins or the White House in ashes. But what if they hadn't? But what if they hadn't fought back? What if, in that critical moment, fear had outweighed courage? What if the passengers of United 93 had hesitated, even for just a minute longer? The answer is chilling. The plane was already heading southeast, cutting through the sky at 500 miles per hour. It was just minutes away from Washington, D.C. The cockpit was sealed, the hijackers were in control, and their mission was clear: strike the core of American democracy. The White House, the U.S. Capitol, these weren't just buildings, they were symbols of freedom, power, and everything the attackers wanted to destroy. Had the passengers not intervened, the plane almost certainly would have hit one of them. Imagine the U.S. Capitol, packed with lawmakers, reduced to rubble in seconds. Or the White House, the home of the president, obliterated in a fireball of steel and jet fuel. The loss would have gone far beyond the physical. It would have shattered the illusion of safety. It would have crippled the government, stunned the world, and possibly changed the course of American history. In that terrifying alternate timeline, the fourth plane completes its deadly arc. The nation bleeds, not just from wounds, but from something deeper, a broken heart. And all because no one was there to say, "Let's roll." Imagine this. It's 10:03 a.m. on September 11th, 2001. The sky over Washington, D.C. is bright, deceptively calm. Secret Service agents rush through the West Wing, shouting into radios, eyes wide with terror. A fourth hijacked plane has just been spotted, and it's not turning away. It's coming straight for the White House. Inside, chaos reigns. President George W. Bush having just been informed of the earlier attacks while reading to schoolchildren in Florida, is being moved quickly toward Air Force One. But back in D.C., Vice President Dick Cheney, senior advisors, military generals, and national security staff are all inside the building. There's no time, no chance to evacuate everyone. And then it happens. A thunderous explosion. The hijacked plane, United 93, slams into the south side of the White House at over 500 miles per hour. Fire and steel consume the historic structure. The Oval Office is obliterated in seconds. The West Wing collapses. The Rose Garden turns to scorched earth. The American flag atop the building disappears in a ball of fire. From Pennsylvania Avenue, horrified onlookers scream. Reporters run for cover. The world watches in real time as smoke pours from the heart of American democracy. It's unthinkable, but now it's real. The cost in lives and leadership. The casualty count is immediate and staggering. The Vice President, missing. National Security Council members, presumed dead. Senior military leaders, gone. White House staff, Secret Service agents, tour guides, even civilians visiting the grounds, all caught in the blast. And perhaps worst of all, no one knows for sure if the president made it out. News networks scramble. Rumors swirl. Has the president been killed? Is the government still functioning? For the first time in modern history, Americans are forced to consider a chilling possibility. The entire executive branch might be gone. The symbolic collapse. More than just a building has fallen. The White House isn't simply a residence. It is the face of the free world, the beacon on the hill, the image burned into history books, currency, and the imagination of billions. To see it burning, crumbling, is to witness the death of American invincibility. For generations, Americans believed that war, destruction, terror, those belonged elsewhere, across oceans, behind other flags. But now, the unshakable heart of the United States has been shaken to the ground. Psychologically, it's a wound that cuts deeper than even the Twin Towers. The skyline can be rebuilt. But this is a decapitation of national identity, martial law, and the edge of panic. Within hours, emergency powers are invoked. Martial law is declared in multiple cities. Troops patrol the streets of Washington, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Fighter jets circle overhead. A no-fly zone covers the entire continental U.S. Curfews go into effect. Border crossings shut down. The government orders the media to halt unverified broadcasts. The line between democracy and survival blurs. The American people, usually resilient, often divided, now unite under a single emotion. Fear. Not just of another attack, but of something darker, the unknown. The global shockwave around the world, allies stare in disbelief. Enemies gloat in secret. Stock markets crash. Oil prices soar. Embassies go into lockdown. NATO activates its collective defense clause for the first time in history. And then comes the fury. America strikes back. Harder, faster, and with less restraint. Afghanistan is not just invaded, it's scorched. The CIA and special forces operate with near-limitless power. New enemy states are named. Iran, Iraq, Syria, North Korea. A global war on terror ignites with a vengeance few could have imagined. A new America, forged in fire. In this alternate timeline, the America that emerges from the ashes of the White House is angrier, more militant, and less forgiving. The Patriot Act becomes just the beginning. Surveillance expands. Civil liberties shrink. Citizens begin to trade freedom for security, and it feels like a fair trade for now. Political dissent is monitored. Muslim communities face scrutiny and discrimination like never before. Fear becomes policy. The president, once located and confirmed alive, speaks to the nation from a bunker. He appears pale, shaken, but resolute. They tried to kill our spirit. They failed. But we will not fail in destroying theirs. The camera pans out. An American flag, soot-stained, ripped, flutters in the background. But it's not the same flag anymore. It's been scarred. 10:03 a.m. September 11th, 2001. Instead of falling in an empty field in Pennsylvania, United Airlines Flight 93 continues on its deadly path. The hijackers, undeterred, press forward with a singular, terrifying mission. Washington, D.C. grows larger in the cockpit windows. As the gleaming white dome of the United States Capitol building comes into view, the plane dips low. Tourists on the National Mall look up. Some scream, others freeze. There's no time to react. In seconds, the unthinkable becomes real. A fireball erupts, the world's most iconic legislative building where democracy has endured wars, protests, scandals, and history itself, is instantly engulfed in smoke, flame, and rubble. Stone columns shatter, marble floors crumble. The rotunda collapses like paper. The Statue of Freedom atop the dome is launched skyward, tumbling into fire. The U.S. Capitol, the People's House, has been turned into a grave. A government gutted in real time. Inside the building, the House and Senate were both in session. Hundreds of lawmakers, senators, representatives, staffers, aides, were in chambers or committee rooms when the impact hit. There are no survivors from the direct point of impact. Many of the most senior members of Congress are dead. Party leaders, committee chairs, even the Speaker of the House, gone. Emergency personnel pull survivors from the rubble, bloodied and ash-covered, but the scene is pure devastation. The heart of the American legislative branch has been severed in one brutal stroke. Live news footage shows flames consuming the dome as stunned anchors struggle to find words. Viewers across the country and around the world watch the destruction of democracy in real time. A crisis of power and succession with the Capitol destroyed and hundreds of lawmakers dead or missing, the U.S. government is thrown into chaos. Who's in charge now? The Constitution provides a line of succession. But what happens when so many on that list are presumed dead? The president is airborne. The vice president was believed to be inside the Capitol. Cabinet members are being rushed to secure locations, but communication is fractured. Constitutional scholars are summoned on live television to explain emergency clauses. Governors demand information. Protesters and mourners gather outside makeshift command centers. America isn't just under attack. It's leaderless. The symbolic collapse of American democracy. The Capitol is more than just stone and history. It's where the voice of the people echoes into law. It's where the balance of power lives. It is, in many ways, the soul of American governance. And now that soul is gone. The psychological toll is devastating. If the White House is the mind of the nation, the Capitol is its heart. With both now targeted, America feels amputated. The loss creates a vacuum, not only in governance, but in national identity. It's no longer just about lives lost. It's about principles lost. The world watches. And recalculates. Global capitals fall into stunned silence. What does a world look like without a functioning United States government? Stock markets crash further. Allies fear instability. Enemies whisper about opportunity. The UN holds emergency sessions. NATO strengthens its defense posture. China and Russia seize the moment to project strength. The United States, long seen as the world's moral compass and stabilizing force, is now the wounded giant. In the vacuum of American leadership, regional powers grow bolder. Rogue actors test red lines. Alliances strain. The age of Pax Americana shows its cracks, and the future begins to tilt. Domestic fallout, suspicion, surveillance, and suppression. Back home, fear turns inward. American Muslims face surging hate crimes. Civil rights are quietly dialed down in favor of national security. Surveillance laws expand unchecked. The media is placed under temporary information management protocols. Conspiracy theories swirl. Some claim the Capitol attack was an inside job. Others scream for retribution. With the legislative branch decimated, emergency powers are invoked. Executive orders become law. Governors begin to question Washington's ability to function. Secessionist rhetoric returns in fringe movements. The very fabric of American federalism begins to fray. A country once held together by ideas and process is now clinging to survival through fear and force. Rebuilding, but not the same. Eventually, Congress will reconvene, not in the Capitol, but in a fortified, undisclosed location. New members will be appointed, special elections held. The rubble will be cleared. A temporary capital may be built. But something will have changed. Permanently. The Capitol was not just architecture, it was the ritual of democracy. Debate, dissent, compromise. Without it, every session feels artificial. Symbolism matters. And for a long time, the rebuilt Capitol, no matter how grand, will carry the ghost of that day, the day America lost its voice. If United 93 had reached the Capitol, the death toll wouldn't just be in bodies. It would be in trust, in stability, in the global perception of democracy itself. It would have silenced debate. It would have frozen laws. It would have left the Constitution hanging by a thread. And perhaps most terrifying of all, it would have made America question whether its system could survive its own destruction. If United 93 had reached its target, whether the White House or the Capitol, the psychological wound dealt to the United States would have been far deeper. But beyond American soil, the consequences would have rippled across the entire planet like aftershocks from a tectonic rupture. In this darker timeline, the world doesn't just mourn with America. It braces for impact. Because in this version of history, America doesn't just bleed, it roars. A hotter, harder war on terror. In our reality, the United States invaded Afghanistan less than a month after 9/11, toppling the Taliban government that had sheltered al-Qaeda. But in this alternate timeline, where the Capitol or White House lies in ruins, that military response would be faster, more brutal, and less surgical. The American people, reeling from images of their democracy burning, would not have settled for precision airstrikes or limited troop deployments. They would have demanded annihilation, not justice, vengeance. Afghanistan would still have fallen, but it wouldn't have stopped there. The Bush administration, under pressure to make an example, might have expanded the theater of war to any nation even suspected of harboring extremists. Iraq, already on the radar, becomes an inevitable target, but so might Iran. Syria, Yemen, Somalia. Preemptive war becomes policy. The doctrine of, you're either with us or against us, solidifies into an iron rule. Civilian casualties skyrocket. Global anti-American sentiment surges. But domestically, the war machine only gains momentum. The scars of 9/11 weren't just emotional. They were ideological. In this timeline, the United States doesn't just lead a war on terror. It leads a war against uncertainty itself, the rise of the surveillance state. Even in the real world, the Patriot Act changed the face of American civil liberties. Warrantless wiretaps, data mining, secret court orders. In the world where United 93 completes its mission, those policies are not just expanded, they are weaponized. Congress, already decimated or displaced, grants near unlimited authority to the executive branch. Intelligence agencies are fused, expanded, militarized. A Department of Homeland Security is not just created, it becomes a national force with domestic policing powers. The line between international threats and internal dissent begins to blur. Airports turn into high-security zones with biometric checkpoints, facial recognition, and predictive profiling. Every Muslim passenger is flagged. Every Middle Eastern name is scrutinized. Thousands are placed on no-fly lists, watch lists, or detained without charge. Online privacy becomes a memory. Encryption is labeled suspicious. Surveillance isn't just passive, it's pervasive. A nation divided, fear turns inward. The aftermath of 9/11 already saw a sharp rise in hate crimes against Muslims, Sikhs, and anyone perceived as foreign. But in this darker timeline, that spike becomes a tidal wave. Mosques are vandalized and burned. Hijabi women are assaulted in daylight. Muslim American soldiers returning from duty are called traitors. Neighborhoods become hostile. Communities live in fear not just of terrorists, but of neighbors. Political leaders fan the flames. Talk radio calls for registration databases. Conspiracy theories thrive, not just on fringe websites, but in mainstream politics. The very fabric of multicultural America, already frayed, begins to tear, global alliances under strain. In the weeks following the real 9/11, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, declaring that an attack on one member was an attack on all. But in this alternate history, where the capital has been destroyed, America doesn't request support from allies. It demands it. The global coalition expands, but not by consensus, by pressure. Nations like the UK, Canada, and Australia fall in line. Others, like France and Germany, hesitate and are met with economic threats, diplomatic cold shoulders, or worse. The United States becomes less a global leader and more a global enforcer. International institutions like the UN struggle to hold ground as American unilateralism rises. Trade alliances are tested. Intelligence sharing agreements are renegotiated with conditions. In many parts of the world, American freedom becomes an ironic phrase, associated not with liberty, but with occupation, rendition, and drone strikes. The age of endless war. Without United 93's intervention, the American people are no longer just motivated by grief, they are haunted by existential dread. Every airport becomes a target. Every brown-skinned passenger becomes a suspect. Every unknown country becomes a potential enemy. The result? An America that cannot stop fighting. Iraq is invaded. Iran is destabilized. Syria falls into chaos. The war budget swells. Military contractors profit. The Department of Defense absorbs even more national funding. Young Americans sign up to serve, not always out of patriotism, but out of fear. An entire generation grows up knowing only war. By 2010, the war on terror is no longer a war. It's a way of life. A shattered mirror. The United States still calls itself the land of the free, but in the mirror, it no longer recognizes its reflection. In this alternate reality, America doesn't rebuild in unity. It rebuilds with suspicion in its heart and a drone in its sky. The global village becomes a battlefield, and the Constitution, once a beacon, becomes a document interpreted through the lens of national survival. The passengers of United 93 didn't just save a building, they saved restraint. They saved a future where war didn't swallow the world whole. Because had they failed, this is what could have followed. A globe gripped by militarism, a democracy distorted by fear, and a world order defined not by diplomacy, but by fire. In the wake of a full-scale 9/11 attack, one that included the destruction of the Capitol or the White House, America wouldn't have just emerged scarred. It would have been fundamentally altered. The trauma of losing both lives and symbols of power in one morning would have done more than ignite fury. It would have planted seeds of doubt in the very soul of the nation. What if the system doesn't work? What if democracy can't protect us? What if freedom is weakness? A nation that hurts deeper, longer. National grief after 9/11 was real and raw. But in this darker timeline, it transforms into something heavier, more permanent. Hope becomes harder to find. Unity fades faster. The nation doesn't just mourn, it fractures. Civic trust collapses. Schools, churches, even sports stadiums tighten security. Americans look at one another through a lens of suspicion. The shared identity of we the people frays at the edges. And as fear takes root, Americans begin to trade something precious in return for a sense of control, their freedom, a softer authoritarianism. Unlike dictatorships with tanks in the streets, America's transformation would be more subtle, but no less real. To protect the homeland, sweeping national security laws would pass with overwhelming bipartisan support. These laws would expand executive authority, reduce judicial oversight, and give federal agencies the power to monitor, detain, and interrogate without due process, especially if national security was invoked. The Department of Homeland Security becomes the most powerful agency in America. Fusion centers spring up in every major city, combining local police with federal intelligence. Military contractors gain the authority to patrol American streets during emergency phases. It doesn't feel like tyranny, not at first, but it feels less like America. A constitution in the shadows, free speech still exists, but it's policed, protests are watched, social media is mined in real time. Whistleblowers are prosecuted under expanded espionage laws. Encryption is seen as suspicious. Anonymous browsing is banned. The Fourth Amendment? Reinterpreted. The First Amendment? Not absolute. The balance of power? Heavily skewed toward the executive branch, until the crisis ends. Though the crisis never truly does. The rise of a managed media. After the Capitol attack, the government doesn't just call for emergency powers. It demands information unity. News outlets are pressured to delay publishing unverified reports. Networks that challenge official narratives are labeled irresponsible or even unpatriotic. A new office within the government is created to oversee the media during national emergencies. Under the banner of preventing panic, censorship slowly creeps in. It starts with limiting terrorist propaganda, then with silencing conspiracy theories. Eventually, dissenting opinions, especially those criticizing American foreign policy or military decisions, are marginalized. The media landscape becomes polarized. Government-approved narratives versus underground resistance. Freedom versus fear. A tipping point. At some point, Americans begin to ask themselves, is this what safety looks like? Is it worth it? But by then, many of the changes have been normalized. Young people grow up under this new reality. They don't remember anything different. The checkpoints, the watch lists, the digital surveillance. It's just life now. And maybe that's the quietest tragedy of all. Because the terrorists didn't just destroy buildings. They didn't just kill people. In this version of history, they killed an idea. They made America afraid of being America. They weren't soldiers. They weren't trained. They had no weapons, no orders, no backup. But when the moment came, they stood up anyway. The passengers on United Flight 93 were just like the rest of us. Business travelers, retires, flight attendants, parents heading home, students heading west. Strangers who, on any other day, would have passed each other in silence. But on September 11th, 2001, they became something far greater. They became heroes. When they learned through phone calls what was happening across the country, that planes had crashed into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, they didn't freeze. They didn't beg. They acted. They took a vote. They said goodbye to their loved ones. And then they charged the cockpit. What happened next? The chaos, the struggle, the crash in a Pennsylvania field was tragic. But it was also transformative, because by sacrificing their own lives, the passengers of United 93 may have saved hundreds, even thousands of others. They may have saved the White House, the Capitol, the Constitution itself. They didn't have ranks. They didn't wear medals. But they made a decision that changed the course of American history. In a world spiraling into terror, they gave us a moment of defiance, of unity, of courage. Their names, Todd Beamer, Tom Burnett, Jeremy Glick, and so many others, are etched not only into memorials, but into the very spirit of what it means to be American. Because that day, they reminded us who we are, and who we must continue to be. It's easy to look back at 9/11 and think it couldn't have been worse. But it could have been, much worse. If United 93 had reached its target, if that plane had slammed into the Capitol Dome or the White House, the United States might have unraveled in real time. Not just in death toll, but in soul. Not just buildings lost, but the very idea of America shaken to its core. We might have witnessed the fall of democracy live on television. We might have seen the Constitution buried in ash. We might have watched the world descend into a new kind of war, not just on terror, but on trust, liberty, and global order. Would it have sparked another world war? Would nations have picked sides, not based on ideology, but fear? Would America, in trying to defend freedom, have abandoned it? We'll never know the full weight of what was avoided that day. But we do know this: a small group of everyday people, strangers until that moment, stood between the world and an even darker chapter of history. Their courage wrote a different ending to that morning. They gave us not just time to grieve, but room to rebuild. But their story comes with a warning. What if next time we don't act? What if the next threat isn't in a plane, but in silence, in division, in apathy? Because evil doesn't always crash through walls. Sometimes it waits for us to stop paying attention. So we remember Flight 93, not just for what it was, but for what it prevented. And we ask ourselves, will we be ready when the next choice comes? And now we return to the present. The world didn't end that day. The White House still stands. The Capitol dome still shines beneath the sun. The Constitution is still intact. Planes still fly overhead. Children still visit memorials, not ruins. But it was close, closer than most people will ever realize. United 93 didn't just crash into a field, it crashed into history and redirected its course. That open stretch of land in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, became more than a crash site. It became a turning point. And what turned it wasn't missiles or military might. It was the courage of ordinary people, people who made a choice. In just a few terrifying minutes, they reminded the world that sometimes the smallest actions carry the greatest weight. That sometimes history isn't written by presidents or generals, but by strangers who refuse to be victims. So what does that mean for us, now? It means the fight for freedom doesn't only happen on battlefields, it happens in boardrooms, in classrooms, in living rooms, in voting booths, in quiet moments where we choose to stand up for one another, to tell the truth, to care. It means democracy isn't just a system, it's a decision, one we must keep making every day. In a time that still feels uncertain, in an age of algorithms, division, and noise, let's not forget the lesson those heroes taught us. That even in chaos, there is courage. Even in fear, there is strength. And even in darkness, there is always a choice. Hold on to that, because the next turning point may come when no one is watching, and once again, it will be up to us. We've just walked through an alternate reality, one we narrowly avoided, thanks to the courage of a few everyday people. Now it's your turn. What are you thinking right now? How did this make you feel? Do you believe small actions can truly change the course of history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. If this video moved you, if it made you reflect, feel, or even rethink what you thought you knew, please give it a like, share it with someone, and subscribe for more powerful stories that matter. Because remembering the past isn't enough. We must learn from it. And more importantly, we must choose to act when it matters most. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.